It was May 22nd, 2013. A 911 call came in from Palmdale, California. On the line was a mother's voice, claiming her son had fallen and hit his head. But when paramedics arrived at the scene, what they found was far from what was described. A young boy, unclothed, injured, and visibly suffering. His condition told a very different story. This was no ordinary accident. This is the heartbreaking and difficult story of Gabriel Fernandez, an 8-year-old child who endured unimaginable pain and neglect at the hands of those who were supposed to protect him. His mother, Pearl Fernandez, and her boyfriend, Isauro Aguirre. It's also the haunting account of a system that ignored many clear warning signs with more than 60 opportunities to intervene and possibly prevent a tragedy. Gabriel was born on February 20th, 2005. His life began with abandonment. Just 3 days after his birth, his mother left him at the hospital without plans to care for him. For the next 7 years, Gabriel was raised by his uncle and grandparents, who offered him the care, comfort, and stability every child deserves. By all accounts, he was a joyful, kind-hearted little boy who loved drawing, playing, and spending time with his siblings. But in 2012, Pearl requested that Gabriel return to her care. Not, according to reports, out of love, but allegedly to receive additional financial assistance through welfare benefits. Despite a documented history of past neglect involving her other children, the system went forward with the custody change. Gabriel's relatives, who had lovingly cared for him, were heartbroken and extremely concerned for his safety, with good reason. Pearl was now living with Isauro Aguirre, a former security guard who would soon become a serious threat in Gabriel's life. Between 2012 and 2013, Gabriel was subjected to treatment described by prosecutors as some of the most extreme and disturbing they had ever seen. It was a period marked by pain, control, and emotional harm. He endured frequent physical punishment. According to documented evidence, he sustained injuries from being struck with household objects and other implements. He was also reportedly subjected to degrading and dehumanizing acts, including food deprivation, forced confinement, and prolonged isolation in small spaces. Much of this mistreatment, as later revealed, stemmed from Aguirre's assumptions about Gabriel's identity, driven by deeply rooted personal bias. What made the situation even more devastating was the fact that the system had prior warnings. More than 60 complaints involving Pearl Fernandez were filed from 2003 to 2012. These concerns led to at least 8 separate investigations by Los Angeles County Child Protective Services and the Department of Children and Family Services. Social workers visited the home. They recorded concerns. And yet Gabriel remained in a dangerous and unsafe environment. Then came May 22nd, 2013, a day that started like so many others but ended in tragedy. That morning, Gabriel suffered yet another violent incident. But this time, the injuries were so severe that his young body simply couldn't withstand the trauma. Pearl called 911, stating her son had fallen and hit his head on a piece of furniture. However, Gabriel's condition told a very different story. A severe head injury, broken ribs, multiple visible wounds, dental trauma, and burn marks. His face was so swollen from repeated blows that his eyes were swollen shut. These were not injuries caused by a fall. They were the outcome of sustained and prolonged harm over time. Gabriel was rushed to the hospital and shortly after arrival was declared brain dead. For 2 excruciating days, this brave and innocent child clung to life on life support. On May 24th, 2013, Gabriel Fernandez passed away, just 8 years old. His death left a lasting mark on the community and on the nation. On May 28, 2013, both Pearl Fernandez and Isauro Aguirre were formally charged with capital murder, including the special circumstance of prolonged harm. The evidence presented was extensive and deeply troubling. Pearl, facing the possibility of the death penalty, agreed to a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Her defense team argued that she lacked the cognitive ability to fully understand her actions, but the judge remained unswayed and upheld her sentence. Isauro Aguirre chose to stand trial. The case against him included disturbing photographs, emotional testimony, and a timeline that pointed to premeditated and systematic mistreatment. The jury unanimously recommended the death penalty, which Judge George G. Lomeli officially imposed on June 7, 2018. Gabriel's tragic death triggered widespread outrage across Los Angeles County. Public protests erupted, and citizens demanded accountability. How could a child suffer for so long under the watch of so many? How did dozens of complaints and multiple investigations result in no protection? The case became a symbol of systemic failure within child welfare institutions and sparked calls for reform. In 2021, Pearl Fernandez sought a resentencing, claiming that changes in California law should apply to her case. But in June of that year, a judge rejected her request, ensuring that justice would stand firm. Today, Pearl Fernandez, now 37, is incarcerated at Chowchilla State Women's Prison, serving a life sentence with no possibility of parole. Isauro Aguirre remains on death row at San Quentin State Prison. Due to California's ongoing moratorium on executions, his sentence remains indefinitely pending. Number 2. Diane Downs. On the night of May 19, 1983, 27-year-old Diane Downs drove urgently to Mackenzie Willamette Hospital in Springfield, Oregon. Inside her vehicle were her 3 children, severely injured and bleeding: 8-year-old Christy, 7-year-old Cheryl, and 3-year-old Danny. Each child had been harmed at close range. Diane herself had a gunshot wound in her left forearm. What at first appeared to be a tragic random act would soon unfold as one of the most disturbing cases of maternal violence in American history. When officers asked Diane what had happened, she offered a troubling and suspicious account. According to her, while she was driving along a remote country road around 10 p.m., a man with unkempt hair flagged down her car and demanded that she step out. When she refused, she claimed the man suddenly began firing on her and the children before disappearing into the night. At first, it seemed like a case of wrong place, wrong time. But investigators quickly began to suspect that the real threat wasn't a mysterious stranger. It had arrived with the children at the hospital. Tragically, Cheryl had already passed away by the time they arrived. Danny was left paralyzed, and Christy was fighting for her life. But something didn't add up. Hospital staff and police both noted Diane's demeanor was strange. Witnesses recalled that she was driving slowly, under 10 miles per hour, hardly the pace of someone rushing to save her children. This, along with other inconsistencies, raised concerns. As detectives investigated, her account began to fall apart. The scene didn't support her story. There was no evidence of a struggle, and no trace of the alleged attacker. Most telling, forensic tests found that bullets from Diane's own home matched the ones recovered from the car. Marks on the casings linked them to a weapon associated with her. The implication was horrifying. The weapon used in the shooting may have come from her own household. Then came the motive. Diane had reportedly been in a relationship with a man who had made it clear he didn't want children. According to witnesses and phone records, Diane became increasingly attached to the idea of a future with him. In her deeply distorted reasoning, her children became obstacles to her happiness, ones she believed she had to remove. On February 28, 1984, 9 months after the shooting, Diane was arrested. Throughout the investigation, she showed little visible remorse. In fact, during her trial, she appeared to manipulate public perception. She became pregnant while awaiting trial, reportedly hoping to gain sympathy and present herself in a more positive light. Her trial began in May 1984 and quickly became one of Oregon's most closely watched cases. The prosecution presented compelling evidence, matching ballistics, witness testimony, and medical reports. But the most heart-wrenching moment came when Christy, just 8 years old, took the stand. Christy had survived the attack but suffered from aphasia, a speech disorder caused by her injuries. As she slowly regained her ability to speak, she began to recall what happened that night. In a trembling voice, she testified that she saw her mother retrieve a firearm from the trunk and harm her siblings, then herself. "My mom hurt me and my brother and sister," she told the court. Her words were devastating and carried enormous emotional weight. A psychiatrist testified that Diane displayed no signs of regret. She viewed her children less as individuals with feelings and more as possessions. Her affection for them was conditional, tied only to how they fit into her desires and goals. On June 17, 1984, Diane Downs was found guilty of murder, attempted murder, and assault. She was sentenced to life in prison plus 50 years. Even after her conviction, her behavior remained troubling. In 1987, she escaped from a correctional facility, claiming she could prove her innocence. Authorities found her just 10 days later, only a few blocks from the prison. Meanwhile, Christy and Danny were adopted by Fred Hugie, the prosecutor who had tried their mother's case, and his wife, Joanne. They were given the chance to rebuild their lives in a loving, stable environment. As of 2025, Diane Downs is still serving her sentence at Valley State Prison for Women in California. She has been denied parole 3 times, most recently in 2020. More than 40 years have passed since the crime, and Diane continues to claim she was wrongly convicted. In February 2024, she filed a new petition seeking to overturn her case, but her efforts remain unsuccessful. Number 3. Louise Turpin. On January 14, 2018, after enduring years of hardship, 17-year-old Jordan Turpin climbed out of a window in her family's home in Paris, California, and called 911. That one courageous act uncovered one of the most disturbing child mistreatment cases in recent American memory. For over 2 decades, Jordan and her 12 siblings had lived under extreme conditions. Their parents, Louise and David Turpin, had created a highly controlled and restrictive environment that left lasting scars. To outsiders, the Turpins seemed like an ordinary homeschooling family. David was employed as an engineer, while Louise stayed home. In 2010, they moved from Fort Worth, Texas to California, settling in Paris. On the surface, they looked like any suburban household. But behind closed doors, the reality was far different. The children, from toddlers to young adults, were kept in unclean rooms, confined with restraints, and denied regular access to basic needs like hygiene, meals, and medical support. Many of the older children appeared much younger than their age due to lack of proper nutrition. Jordan had carefully planned her escape for years. At 17, she weighed just 97 pounds and had never set foot outside unsupervised. On the night of her call, her voice trembled as she told dispatch, "My 2 little sisters right now are chained up." She added, "I haven't bathed in almost a year. I haven't seen a doctor since 2013. Despite her fear, she spoke with clarity. When officers arrived, they discovered a deeply troubling scene. Children in restraints, some unable to speak or stand. Evidence pointed to chronic neglect, nutritional deprivation, and isolation. Authorities soon determined this was not a case of ignorance, but a long-running pattern. The parents had enforced strict rules, withholding food and isolating the children from the outside world. Additional accusations of serious misconduct were also made. Publicly, the Turpins had maintained an illusion. Their social media showed smiling kids in matching outfits. Neighbors rarely saw the children, and when they did, they appeared pale and underweight. Although there were calls made to child protection agencies over the years, intervention never came until Jordan's escape. Her bravery changed everything. For the first time, the world learned about the lives these children had led. As the investigation unfolded, Louise's response to her arrest drew concern. She showed limited reaction and insisted she had done nothing wrong. Sadly, the story didn't end there. After being rescued, some of the children were later mistreated in the very system meant to help them. In 2024, a foster parent named Marcelino Olguin received a 7-year sentence for causing harm, underscoring the need for better safeguards for vulnerable children. In court, Louise and David first pleaded not guilty, but later changed to guilty under a plea deal in February 2019. Their acknowledgement came not with remorse, but from the overwhelming proof. One of the most emotional moments came when one of the Turpin children addressed the court, saying, "My parents took my whole life from me." Still, some siblings voiced hope and even love for their parents, highlighting how complex and deep emotional ties can run, even in difficult situations. On April 19, 2019, Louise was sentenced to 25 years to life. David received a similar sentence, though media coverage focused heavily on Louise's role. As of 2025, she remains incarcerated in California, with eligibility for parole after 25 years. If denied, she could remain behind bars permanently. Meanwhile, the children are on a journey of healing. Despite everything, they are working to build better lives, showing strength and resilience far beyond what many could imagine. Number 4. Theresa Knorr. Between 1984 and 1985, Theresa Knorr became one of the most shocking cases of maternal abuse in America, responsible for the deaths of her own 2 daughters. What made the case even more unsettling was her use of surviving children to cover up the crimes. Living in Sacramento, California with her 6 children, Theresa already had a history of extreme control and mistreatment. Her 17-year-old daughter, Susan, endured the worst of it. In 1983, during a violent episode, Theresa injured Susan with a .22 caliber rifle. Instead of seeking help, she attempted to remove the bullet herself using an X-Acto knife, resulting in a severe infection that left Susan in distress. By July 1984, Susan's condition worsened, and Theresa viewed her as a threat. On July 16, 1984, she gave Susan medication to sedate her and instructed her sons, Robert and William, to help dispose of her. With her mouth taped shut, Susan was taken to a remote area in the Sierra Nevada foothills, where she was tragically left and set ablaze. The pain didn't end there. A year later, Theresa's next victim was her other daughter, Sheila Sanders. In 1985, Sheila too became a target of Theresa's violent outbursts. Like Susan, her remains were found in a remote location showing signs of extreme mistreatment. For nearly a decade, authorities had no answers. Though both bodies were found in 1984 and 1985, the cases went cold. It wasn't until 1993 that the truth emerged, sparked by a call to America's Most Wanted. Terry Knorr, one of Theresa's surviving daughters, found the strength to share what she had lived through. After years of emotional trauma, Terry revealed everything to authorities, finally breaking open the long, unsolved case. The investigation picked up quickly. On November 4, 1993, William Knorr was arrested in Woodland, California. Just 6 days later, Theresa was found and taken into custody in Salt Lake City, Utah. She faced multiple charges, including 2 counts of murder, conspiracy, and special circumstances due to the nature of the crimes. As investigators dug deeper, they uncovered a history of extreme emotional and physical abuse. Theresa had not only caused the deaths of 2 daughters, but had manipulated her surviving children into hiding the truth. Their testimonies painted a picture of a household filled with fear, control, and deep trauma. Combined with physical evidence, the case against Theresa was strong. Facing the death penalty, she eventually changed her plea from not guilty to avoid capital punishment. In 1995, Theresa Knorr received 2 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. She was also investigated in connection with her first husband's passing, but due to a lack of solid evidence, she wasn't convicted in that case. As of 2025, Theresa remains incarcerated at the California Institution for Women in Chino, California, having served over 30 years. Ultimately, it was Terry's bravery that brought long-awaited justice for Susan and Sheila. Her decision to speak out ended years of silence and ensured that Theresa would never be able to hurt anyone again. Number 5. Michelle Kehoe. On October 26, 2008, 36-year-old Michelle Kehoe told her husband, Gene, that she was taking their 2 young boys, 7-year-old Sean and 2-year-old Seth, to visit relatives in Sumner, Iowa. But that day would take a dark turn that no one could have foreseen. Instead of heading to family, Michelle drove her sons miles away to a secluded pond in Buchanan County. There, in a deeply tragic moment, she covered their faces with duct tape, over their eyes, noses, and mouths. She then used a knife to harm them. 2-year-old Seth did not survive, while 7-year-old Sean, fighting for his life, managed to lock himself in the van, escaping further harm. Michelle then turned the knife on herself in what appeared to be a suicide attempt. The next day, she showed up at a gas station and flagged down help, telling authorities that a stranger had attacked her and the boys, claiming Seth had been killed and Sean badly injured. She described a detailed account of a violent intruder, attempting to shift the blame. Back at home, Gene had grown worried. His family was missing, and Michelle's story raised suspicions. As police launched their investigation, it was Sean who provided the breakthrough. From his hospital bed, though gravely injured, he calmly explained, "She put duct tape over my eyes, nose, and mouth." He told officers that it was his mother who had hurt him and his brother. Michelle's injuries were quickly determined to be self-inflicted, and there was no evidence of any attacker. The investigation made one thing clear. This was no random act. It was an intentional act by a mother against her own children. Michelle was arrested and charged with first-degree murder, attempted murder, and child endangerment. Her legal team entered a plea of not guilty by reason of insanity, claiming her long struggle with depression distorted her thinking. In November 2009, her trial began. Due to widespread attention, it was moved to Grundy County to ensure fairness. Prosecutors laid out a compelling case, including video from Sean's interview, where he quietly described what happened. The defense argued Michelle didn't understand the consequences of her actions, but prosecutors pointed to her planning, driving to a remote location and bringing duct tape and a knife as clear signs of intent. On November 5, 2009, after less than 2 hours of deliberation, the jury returned a guilty verdict. Michelle wept as the decision was read, but the insanity defense was rejected. On December 15th, she was sentenced to life without parole. Since then, Michelle has filed multiple appeals, all of which have been denied. As of 2025, she remains behind bars, serving a life sentence with no chance of release. Number 6. Andrea Yates. Andrea Yates, a 36-year-old mother of 5, shocked the nation when she tragically ended the lives of her children in the family bathtub in their Houston, Texas home. What began as a heartbreaking tragedy quickly became one of the most debated and complex criminal cases in Texas history. But how did a once devoted mother reach such a devastating point? Andrea had long struggled with her mental health. Her battle with depression worsened after the birth of each child. She had previously attempted to take her own life, and her emotional condition continued to decline. After her 4th child, she was diagnosed with postpartum depression. But things became even more serious when she became pregnant with her 5th child. This time she was diagnosed with postpartum psychosis, a rare but severe condition that can cause delusions, confusion, and a loss of connection with reality. As her mental health declined, Andrea became convinced she had to protect her children from future harm. She feared they would suffer if she didn't intervene, believing she was saving them from a worse fate. On a June morning, overwhelmed and unable to cope, Andrea made a tragic choice. One by one, she drowned her 5 children in the bathtub: Noah, 7, John, 5, Paul, 3, Luke, 2, and Mary, just 6 months old. Afterward, Andrea called 911 herself. When authorities arrived, they found her in the living room, soaked and eerily calm, with no immediate signs of panic. Her quiet demeanor left investigators stunned. The question quickly became, why did she do it? The investigation soon revealed the full extent of Andrea's mental illness. Friends and family confirmed her long history of emotional struggles, and mental health professionals testified about postpartum psychosis, explaining how it can cause individuals to lose touch with reality and act under extreme delusions. Despite knowing what she had done, Andrea was not fully capable of understanding its consequences, experts said. Her defense team argued that Andrea's actions were the tragic result of untreated mental illness, insisting she was not in control at the time. The prosecution, on the other hand, claimed her actions were pre-planned. They pointed to her behavior in the days leading up to the tragedy as evidence that she understood her actions and the fact that they were wrong. In 2002, Andrea was convicted of capital murder. The jury had weighed her mental state, but still found her responsible. However, in 2006, her conviction was overturned by the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals due to flawed expert testimony and an inadequate focus on her psychiatric condition. Andrea was retried in 2006. This time the jury found her not guilty by reason of insanity. The court determined that Andrea's psychosis had severely impaired her ability to know right from wrong. She was not sent to prison, but instead committed to a psychiatric facility. As of 2025, Andrea Yates remains in a mental health institution in Texas, where she has been undergoing treatment for over 2 decades. Her case continues to spark discussions around mental illness, motherhood, and the justice system. Number 7. China Arnold. On August 30th, 2005, a deeply tragic incident occurred in Dayton, Ohio. 28-day-old Paris Talley was found unresponsive, and at the center of this heartbreaking case was her mother, China Arnold. At the time, Arnold was a 28-year-old mother of 3, living with her boyfriend, Terrell Talley. That night, things took a troubling turn. Arnold, who had reportedly been drinking heavily, got into a heated argument with her partner. What happened next would leave investigators and the public stunned. It was later alleged that in a moment of overwhelming distress, she placed her infant daughter, Paris, in a microwave, an act that would lead to fatal consequences. Initially, Arnold told police that she had left her daughter in the crib and later found her lifeless. At first glance, her story seemed like it could be a tragic case of sudden infant death. But the deeper investigators looked, the more questions emerged. Her account didn't match the evidence. There were no signs of accidental injury, and Arnold's behavior raised suspicions. The case shifted dramatically when jailhouse informants came forward. Multiple individuals claimed that while in custody, Arnold had spoken about the incident. These confessions, combined with forensic evidence, began to paint a disturbing picture. Medical experts confirmed that Paris's injuries were consistent with exposure to extreme heat, not a random or natural event. By now, investigators were convinced that the incident was not accidental. No physical evidence supported Arnold's initial claims, and the details of the case pointed toward intentional harm. What had seemed unthinkable was now being treated as a criminal act. Arnold went to trial in 2008, but the jury could not come to a unanimous decision, resulting in a mistrial. However, the case was retried in 2011. This time, prosecutors presented a stronger case. They brought in testimonies from those who had spoken to Arnold behind bars, along with detailed forensic reports and Arnold's inconsistent statements. The defense argued that Arnold was heavily intoxicated and emotionally overwhelmed at the time, suggesting that she lacked full control over her actions. They tried to portray her as a struggling mother facing enormous pressure, but the prosecution pushed back, stating that the actions taken were deliberate and methodical. They argued that this was not just a loss of control, but a conscious decision. After reviewing all the evidence, the jury found Arnold guilty of aggravated murder. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Despite the conviction, Arnold continued to insist she was innocent, stating that she had been wrongfully accused. Over the years, she has filed several appeals, but none have led to a change in the verdict. As of 2025, China Arnold remains incarcerated. Her case is remembered not only for its tragic loss, but for the lingering questions and the lasting impact it left on the community. Number 8. Casey Anthony. On July 15, 2008, the disappearance of 2-year-old Kaylee Anthony in Orlando, Florida, became the focus of one of the most widely publicized investigations in American history. What began as a missing child case quickly unfolded into a complex story of contradictions, questionable choices, and a mother whose behavior raised national concern. At the center of it all was Casey Anthony, Kaylee's 22-year-old mother. Astonishingly, Casey reported her daughter missing a full month after she had last been seen. She claimed that a nanny named Zenaida Fernandez Gonzalez had taken Kaylee, a woman investigators later discovered did not exist. As detectives looked closer, Casey's version of events began to unravel. Her actions following Kaylee's disappearance didn't match those of a distressed parent. Instead of searching or showing visible signs of concern, Casey spent the following weeks attending parties, socializing, and repeatedly misleading investigators. Her inconsistent statements, paired with her calm demeanor, only deepened suspicions. The case took a chilling turn in December 2008, when Kaylee's skeletal remains were found in a wooded area near the Anthony family home, just a quarter-mile away. The remains were discovered under a layer of leaves, indicating they had been there for some time. With this discovery, what had appeared to be a missing child case turned into a possible homicide investigation. The cause of Kaylee's death was ruled as homicide by undetermined means. However, investigators noted that duct tape had been found near the remains, including on the skull, suggesting that her mouth may have been intentionally sealed. Though the precise cause of death remained unclear, suspicion grew that her passing may not have been accidental. Attention shifted entirely to Casey Anthony. Her explanations kept changing, and investigators uncovered misleading details, including fabricated stories about her employment and friendships. Her online search history raised further red flags, showing entries for terms like foolproof suffocation and chloroform, which prosecutors would later use as key evidence in the case. Surveillance footage also captured Casey shopping and socializing during the time Kaylee was unaccounted for. Phone and text records painted a picture of someone continuing daily life without signs of crisis. Investigators struggled to understand how a mother could be so calm during such a critical time. In 2011, the case went to trial, becoming one of the most followed courtroom events of the decade. The prosecution argued that Casey had ended her daughter's life to regain her personal freedom. They presented digital records, witness testimony, and expert opinions to support their theory that Kaylee's death was not a tragic accident, but a deliberate act. The defense, however, provided a starkly different account. They claimed that Kaylee had accidentally drowned in the family's swimming pool and that Casey panicked. To support their narrative, a psychologist testified that Casey suffered from significant emotional trauma, which caused her to respond with avoidance and deception rather than honesty. Among the trial's most emotional moments was the presentation of Kaylee's remains to the jury. The images were heartbreaking, and many found them difficult to forget. Still, the focus largely remained on Casey's behavior, how she responded, what she said, and the choices she made in the days and weeks following Kaylee's disappearance. After 33 days of testimony and 11 hours of jury deliberation, the verdict was delivered on July 5, 2011. Casey Anthony was found not guilty of first-degree murder and the more serious charges tied to her daughter's death. However, she was convicted on 4 counts of providing false information to law enforcement. The verdict stunned the public. Many believed justice had not been served, especially given the unanswered questions surrounding the cause of Kaylee's death. Though she was acquitted of the most serious charges, public sentiment remained strongly divided, with many continuing to believe that Casey bore some responsibility. Following the trial, Casey kept a low profile. But in 2022, she resurfaced in a documentary series titled Casey Anthony, Where the Truth Lies. In it, she gave her version of events, once again insisting that she never intended to harm her daughter and maintaining her innocence. The series reignited widespread debate, leaving the public split on what to believe. As of 2025, Casey Anthony remains one of the most controversial figures in modern criminal history. Though she avoids public appearances, the legacy of her case continues to spark debate and reflection on justice, media, and motherhood.